Okay. I keep seeing stuff on Twitter about this whole JK Rowling manifesto thing. It can't be that bad, right? Right? You know what? I can't do this alone. I can't even. Rowling crossed the line. Yell up for a smackdown?
Let's do this.
Kairate! I wish I could say that with the enthusiasm I usually do. Unfortunately, the author of Harry Potter had to go and put her whole leg in her mouth during Pride Week. It seems wrong to do this alone, especially given the wide range of trans perspectives she invalidated with this BS, so I've assembled an awesome ensemble of trans and cis creators alike to tackle this with me. Note that a few of these creators are atheists or agnostics, not polytheists, but I'm mad, so this is a pop video anyway. Special thanks to Susan of Divine Disbelief for reading JK Rowling's article. It spares the rest of us the pain of having to deal with it. I know that Auntie Jen's Little Corner is doing a stream as well, though I'm unsure if it'll be up as of the posting of this video. When it's available, a link to it will be in the iCard above, along with the description. Links to all the collaborators are in the description as well, along with the sources they used. One last thing before we get started, trigger warning. We're going to be discussing transphobia, and there's transphobic language throughout the article and in several of the cases that she cites that we're going to get into. So I'm going to be providing timestamps to each of our collaborators along with the subject matter. If you need to, feel free to skip around. I understand that watch time is important for you two, but so is your mental health, and I care more about you guys taking care of yourselves than I do about my metrics, so take breaks if you need to. With that out of the way, let's dive in.
This isn't an easy piece to write, for reasons that will shortly become clear, but I know it's time to explain myself on an issue surrounded by toxicity. I write this without any desire to add to that toxicity.
Gotta love when folks try to use claims about their intentions as a shield against criticism. I didn't mean to say that, so it's okay.
For people who don't know, last December I tweeted my support for Maya Forstater, a tax specialist who lost her job for what were deemed transphobic tweets. She took her case to an employment tribunal, asking the judge to rule on whether a philosophical belief that sex is determined by biology is protected in law. Judge Taylor ruled that it wasn't.
Let's go ahead and examine this claim first. Who is Maya Forstater and what did she do? According to an article by the BBC and the judge's public statements, Maya tweeted the following about a recent Civil Rights Act passed in Britain for trans people. Note that the tweets are going to be up on the screen, or rather a screenshot of the judge's article where they're cited as a source. However, I'm not going to read them out loud because of the trigger warning that I gave earlier. If you want to see what she said, it's pretty heinous. Later the same year, commenting on Pip/Philip Bunce, a gender-fluid senior director at Credit Suisse, she tweeted this. Keep in mind, those tweets were not the only evidence cited in the case. There was also a profoundly anti-trans interview with Slate, which will be in the judge's statement PDF in the description below, along with statements and letters released after the case. She also had complaints filed against her for misgendering several individuals, including Gregor Murray. One other clarification, she wasn't fired over a tweet. Her contract wasn't renewed due to a long pattern of transphobic behavior and public sentiment. The judge ruled that the decision was justified due to Maya's beliefs being, quote, incompatible with human dignity and the fundamental rights of others, which I completely agree with. Keep in mind that the think tank she worked for specifically dealt with alleviating poverty, which disproportionately affects trans women, and according to their website, also works on gender equality. They want to fight discrimination faced by the GRSM community worldwide. Why would they renew a contract with a TERF?
My interest in trans issues predated Maya's case by almost 2 years, during which I followed the debate around the concept of a gender identity closely. I've met trans people and read sundry books, blogs, and articles by trans people, gender specialists, intersex people, psychologists, safeguarding experts, social workers, and doctors, and followed the discourse online and in traditional media. On one level, my interest in this issue has been professional, because I'm writing a crime series set in the present day, and my fictional female detective is of an age to be interested in and affected by these issues herself. But on another, it's intensely personal, as I'm about to explain.
So you claim you did a bunch of reading, but still stuck to your abusive beliefs. It takes a lot of cognitive dissonance to hold on to such absolutist beliefs in the face of so much evidence between sociological and psychological studies and the weighty testimony of the trans people you claim you've gotten to know. I brought a buddy in who studies sociology for a later section, so we'll see what she has to say when we get there, but I highly doubt you did research with any level of intellectual rigor and came to the conclusions you espouse here. It seems to me like you did a whole bunch of bias-confirming research to try to hold on to your shitty opinions.
Months later, I compounded my accidental like crime by following Magdalene Burns on Twitter. Magdalene was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian who was dying of an aggressive brain tumor. I followed her because I wanted to contact her directly, which I succeeded in doing. However, as Magdalene was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises, dots were joined in the heads of Twitter trans activists, and the level of social media abuse increased. I mention all this only to explain that I knew perfectly well what was going to happen when I supported Maya. I must have been on my 4th or 5th cancellation by then. I expected the threats of violence, to be told I was literally killing trans people with my hate, to be called cunt and bitch, and, of course, for my books to be burned, although one particularly abusive band told me he'd composted them.
On Magdalene Burns, first off, her death was tragic regardless of her awful beliefs, and I'm sincerely sorry for the loss her friends and family experienced at her passing. Brain cancer is no joke. However, her opinions are not immune to criticism, and the content on her YouTube channel is largely non-binary, exclusionary, and transmedicalist, which is not the best legacy for the topic at hand. If anything, your follow at the time, given that you knew her opinions, showcases your support for those opinions. You're an author with a large platform. You hold immense responsibility for what you promote, especially when you consider the age of your target audience. But you knew that, didn't you?
What I didn't expect in the aftermath of my cancellation was the avalanche of emails and letters that came showering down upon me, the overwhelming majority of which were positive, grateful, and supportive. They came from a cross-section of kind, empathetic, and intelligent people, some of them working in fields dealing with gender dysphoria and trans people, who are all deeply concerned about the way a socio-political concept is influencing politics, medical practice, and safeguarding. They're worried about the dangers to young people, gay people, and about the erosion of women's and girls' rights. Above all, they're worried about a climate of fear that serves nobody, least of all trans youth, well.
So you found a bunch of TERFs to support you. Big whoop. A quick trawl through right-wing YouTube will net you a few transmedicalist activists who attack their own community, same as you. Does that make you right? Nah, it just means you get to be wrong together.
I'd stepped back from Twitter for many months both before and after tweeting support for Maya, because I knew it was doing nothing good for my mental health. I only returned because I wanted to share a free children's book during the pandemic. Immediately, activists who clearly believed themselves to be good, kind, and progressive people swarmed back into my timeline, assuming a right to police my speech, accuse me of hatred, call me misogynistic slurs, and, above all, as every woman involved in this debate will know, TERF.
Oof, such victimized language here. I find it interesting that free speech proponents always have such disinterest in their own public criticism. Free speech is more about the government not stopping you from saying whatever you want, not protection from criticism. If people don't want to buy your books for their kids because you say awful things and follow people with awful opinions on Twitter, that's also their right to free expression. And so is their ability to tell you so. I don't support abuse on social media, but we might be defining abuse differently here. Someone telling you that you're wrong, that you're a TERF, and that they're not going to financially support you anymore isn't abuse. Someone disagreeing with you isn't abuse either. If they threatened you or called you names, that could be considered abuse, but a large segment of the population challenging your ideas on Twitter isn't abuse, it's free speech. I have no doubt a number of people took it upon themselves to call you a number of hateful names, but the majority of the discourse I've seen on the topic has been calling out, not abuse. Take that for what you will. Also, I'll condemn people who call you slurs, but TERF isn't a slur, it's an accurate label for the beliefs you espouse. If you're claiming that it is, then you and I have a problem.
If you didn't already know, and why should you, TERF is an acronym coined by trans activists, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. In practice, a huge and diverse cross-section of women are currently being called TERFs, and the vast majority have never been radical feminists. Examples of so-called TERFs range from the mother of a gay child who was afraid their child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying, to a hitherto totally unfeminist older lady who's vowed never to visit Marks and Spencer again because they're allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's changing rooms. Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Note also the language in this section. Any man who says he identifies as a woman. You claim you support trans people, but if a binary trans person doesn't have the means to transition, can't for medical reasons, or otherwise has reasons not to, you're going to immediately doubt their identity? That woman might have just come out the night before for all you know, and this is her first trip to a women's store to get gender-affirming clothing choices. You don't know, and it's a societal privilege you're abusing by using your platform to doubt her identity. Note also what's being implied here, that trans women are actually male predators, and that a trans woman could just be using societal acceptance to prey on cis women. Because you don't see trans women as women, regardless of if you claim you have a few friends you think have done enough work to earn your acceptance. Why you believe it's your place to determine anyone's identity for them is beyond me. People are right to call you out for it, and the inherently dog-whistly and transphobic rhetoric here. Also, trans men are men, full stop, and all men are included in feminism. Last I checked, the discourse on toxic masculinity predominantly talks about how it affects men. Feminist discourse has always included men. It just talks about the ways that the misogyny that we all face hurts them too. I don't see what's wrong with that.
But accusations of TERFery have been sufficient to intimidate many people, institutions, and organizations I once admired, who are cowering before the tactics of the playground. They'll call us transphobic. They'll say I hate trans people. What next? They'll say you've got fleas? Speaking as a biological woman, a lot of people in positions of power really need to grow a pair, which is doubtless literally impossible, according to the kind of people who argue that clownfish prove humans aren't a dimorphic species.
What? I don't think I've ever seen someone argue that clownfish prove humans have no sexual dimorphism. I need a citation on that. What I've seen is that people can cite nature to show that there are more than two sexes, but you can do that with intersex people within humanity itself, so I don't know what you're getting at. You clearly don't accept trans people though, especially with that biological woman dog whistle. All humans start as female in the womb. Hormonal releases trigger the activation of the Y chromosome later in development, but for some folks that never happens. So you have female sex presentation with XY chromosomes among a host of other intersex presentations. Besides that, what do you mean by biological anyway? Biology encompasses more than just the chromosomes as well. After all, hormones account for the majority of sexual dimorphism even in adults. Otherwise, transition would be nigh impossible. Are trans women on hormones not biological women? Biological also just refers to, well, biology. I suppose anyone who identifies as a woman could be considered a biological woman. Alright, so let me go ahead and play editor for a second here and fix that for you. Speaking as a woman. Come on, Rowling, you're a published author. You should know better than to add extra signifiers that are unnecessary into a sentence. Unless, of course, you are trying to signal to other TERFs that you don't consider trans women women, in which case, I guess that biological was necessary there. But you keep claiming that you're not trying to stir the pot, so why are you stirring the pot? I don't get it.
So why am I doing this? Why speak up? Why not quietly do my research and keep my head down?
Seems like you're determined to spread hateful rhetoric and keep playing the victim instead of acknowledging the very real issues with the way you represent things, but that might just be me.
Well, I've got 5 reasons for being worried about the new trans activism and deciding I need to speak up. Firstly, I have a charitable trust that focuses on alleviating social deprivation in Scotland, with a particular emphasis on women and children. Among other things, my trust supports projects for female prisoners and survivors of domestic and sexual abuse. I also fund medical research into MS, a disease that behaves differently in men and women. It's been clear to me for a while that the new trans activism is having, or is likely to have, if all its demands are met, a significant impact on many of the causes I support, because it's pushing to erode the legal definition of sex and replace it with gender.
Interesting how you use men and women when you clearly mean males and females, which ignores the obvious issue of intersex people being excluded in your concerns, but again, we just addressed that. Also, if your organization ignores the rampant abuse that trans women face in both domestic and prison situations, including denial of hormones in the case of prisoners, then your organization doesn't include all women. Trans women have a much higher chance of being abused by both a spouse and the police than the average person, which I covered a bit in my video on Ray Comfort's BS opinions about protesting. Linked to that in the iCard above. Also, I cite my sources there for my statistics on trans people being disproportionately affected by violence. You seem to be signaling here that men might be trying to claim that they're women in order to take advantage of your programs, which is laughable at best. The level of discrimination faced by trans women societally is enough that I highly doubt any self-respecting man would claim to be a woman just to take advantage of a program that predominantly targets women. It's silly, and so is your assertion of it.
The second reason is that I'm an ex-teacher and the founder of a children's charity, which gives me an interest in both education and safeguarding. Like many others, I have deep concerns about the effect the trans rights movement is having on both.
What do you mean? You're afraid that trans kids might be able to get totally safe puberty blockers so they can make an informed decision as to their gender identity? Link in the description below to a study and statements from the Endocrine Society on the issue. Spoiler alert, it's safe.
The third is that, as a much banned author, I'm interested in freedom of speech, and have publicly defended it, even unto Donald Trump.
Okay, we covered this already. Free speech is not freedom from criticism, get a clue. These next points require a bit of help. My friends Talon and Shay from Transgardr, link in the description, both have a unique perspective on the topic I think is worth sharing. After all, Rowling has the gall to bring up autism and detransitioning in the same breath, so why not have a pair of trans women with autism take down her claim?
Hello everyone, Transgardr here. I am Talon, and this is my lovely co-host Shay. How are you doing today, Shay?
I mean, I'm doing pretty good for the most part. It's been a real lax day, but I have this like fucking recurring like pain in my side. I think you might know her. No, it's not you, Callan. Not the world doesn't revolve around you. Okay, it's JK Rowling.
We just heard this lovely little nuisance here. That is JK Rowling, who seems to somehow think that detransitioning is a worrying phenomenon. And you know what? I agree. It is a very worrying phenomenon. Worrying in the fact that people don't detransition for the reasons that she thinks. Right, Chick?
No, a lot of the times when people detransition, it usually has to do with external, like, social factors, such as, like, maybe you're getting a lot of hate in your workplace, maybe you're getting a lot of hate at home, maybe you're getting a lot of hate out in the streets, and, like, to ensure your survival, you think probably the best option would be to detransition. There are, of course, like, a bunch of other social factors that can go into it, such as, like, maybe you don't have the money to afford your hormones anymore. Maybe you lost your insurance for whatever reason, and now you can't see your doctor anymore, which means your prescriptions aren't going to be filled anymore. There is research on the regret statistics of people that do transition, and it's sub 2% of the trans community. And even then, a lot of that comes from, like, problems with surgery rather than not wanting to be, like, trans or something.
Yeah, which can always be noted back to mistakes in general that do happen when, as with any procedure, there are risks.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that was among one of the first issues that both.
I mean,
Shame.
The very first issue actually comes from that very first sentence where she says a huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, when in actuality, what she's talking about is trans men.
You mean, yeah, young men, not young women. She can't even get people's genders right. What kind of author is she?
Not a very good one, honestly. I mean, like, we could talk about, like, the goblins who run the bank, okay? But I think that's probably it's worthy of its own video.
To continue on, we're talking about bodies being irreversibly loss of fertility, which is absolutely nothing.
The loss of fertility is kind of true, but usually what happens when people go to see their doctors, especially with informed consent models, what they'll do is they'll ask people to go see a fertility clinic and freeze your sperm, just in case, like, you want to have, like, biological children. I know personally this is, like, a sore spot for me, but honestly, the trade-off was, like, immense anxiety and immense dysphoria or biological children. And honestly, like, alleviating all of that mental discomfort helped out so much better than, like, the possibility of having kids. And even then, it's not even 100% like guaranteed thing that I wouldn't be able to have kids in the future. A lot of people that go through feminizing HRT can see function return to their, like, testicles, and you can have, like, children.
It's a probability, but, you know, better to not be able to have kids and adopt one than be able to have them with several suicide attempts. Alright, so She also says that some people transition simply because of their same-sex attraction and the homophobia they encounter. The interesting part here is that that is actually a half-truth. It is true for countries like Iran, where, for whatever reason, they decided, hey, being trans is a medical condition that can be cured through proper hormonal and, I guess, sex assignment surgery. So that's okay. But hey, gay people, no, fuck them. They get the death penalty. So what ends up happening in the countries like that is that people, in order to live with their same-sex partners, one of the partners will transition into, say, a woman or a man, depending on sex of their original. Saying original sex is weird here, but it works because not all of them are necessarily trans in the sense of identifying themselves explicitly as trans, even though I'm sure there's a good bit of them that do. But the thing is, she's taking that social phenomena that occurs in, say, Iran, and she seems to be saying that it occurs in other places, which not exactly the case. Is it, Shay?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Last I checked, gay men are men. They very strongly identify as man.
Oh yeah,
and
for sure.
Lesbians, well, you start calling lesbians men and get a lot of issues. Yeah, that's a bit of a hasty generalization on her part. Notice that she doesn't provide any citations here either.
No, this entire thing is devoid of citations and anything to back up baseless claim after baseless claim. But this next part of her little manifesto here is gonna really hit the nail on the head on that point.
It is. Most people probably aren't aware. I'm pretty aware. You can usually tell the difference in terms of language and style between someone who actually deals with trans issues and someone who doesn't. And JK Rowling definitely hasn't been dealing with 10 years in trans issues, maybe in some sort of TERFy cult, but in terms of actual research and actually looking over the paper of the phenomenon, she has next to nothing. But anyhow, apparently the majority of people will need to transition to the opposite sex for male. I mean, I don't know how this is relevant. Do you, Shay?
No, not really. It doesn't matter if it's more trans women who want to transition, or more trans men that want to transition, or even non-binary people who transition in some way. They still exist. They still seek treatment. It's completely moot who has the higher ratio.
Why she
disagrees? I couldn't imagine any reason why, except for the fact that she thinks that trans women are somehow an inherent attack on feminism, despite that not being the fucking case.
But apparently that ratio, according to her, has now reversed. And the UK has apparently experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred for transitioning treatment. Now, note the use of the word referred here. That means that there's been a doctor involved, there's been a medical team involved, there's been psychological counseling involved, and all of these experts have come together and they've said, this person needs to transition. Apparently, JK Rowling disagrees that person needs to transition. I don't know. I mean, does she have a relevant degree or anything that would counteract all these medical professionals?
No, she doesn't. And she's also ignoring, the reason why there's this huge increase in the first place. As far as I'm aware, there were mass openings of gender clinics all throughout the UK. So it gave people a reason to actually seek out treatment. And not until you're in the system, it's unlikely that you'll be counted at all.
A backlog. Imagine that. A backlog triggers a 4,400% increase. Nah, never. Really.
This last line in particular, though, autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers.
You see, among the autistic population, we have 10% of the autistic population is actually trans, as opposed to the 1% of the general population. Now, think about that for a moment. 10% is not actually that small when we're talking about human population.
According to this article I have pulled up from Springer link, that says increased gender variance in autism spectrum disorders and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is the name of the article, and it says participants with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, are about 7.59 times more likely to express gender variance. Participants with ADHD are about 6.64 times more likely to express gender variance, and what this means is that people with autism and ADHD tend to express more gender nonconformity. There is kind of a link between people with autism not explicitly like conforming to like social pressure. I do feel like I need to point out that like not everybody that does experience that sort of like gender nonconformity like grows up to be like a trans person either. But there's something that comes from like exploring like your gender in a more open and honest way, being somebody who's on the autism spectrum.
You mean we can actually be honest with ourselves?
Yeah, actually.
Huh. Well, not according to JK Rowling. Apparently, we don't deserve agency and deserve other people to make our choices for us. So yeah, that does it for our section. It's sad to see Rowling go down this hill, but you know, I guess that's what happens when you sacrifice your heart, your soul to the TERFs.
Yeah, you could say that again. Hopefully one day she'll understand the damage she's causing, but unfortunately I don't see that coming anytime soon.
Thanks, guys. You both are freaking awesome and a stunning example of allyship in the community. Next up, Rowling cites a controversial study with methods called into question by the very journal that published it. Christy Abbey of The Fluid Voice is here to break it down for us with some help from Justin of SJW Debates. Take the floor, Christy.
Let's do this. Well, okay, the numbers section. May have taken on a bit much here, but few of the takedowns are doing anything about this. Mostly because it's hard to find where the sources of JK Rowling's sources are. A lot of them are anecdotal. Now, anecdote is not data, but each of us is a point of anecdote for something. So let's even give a little pinch of something to go with this. Just let's. We're going to have to, or we're never going to get through this, and we really want to get through this, don't we? The fourth is where things start to get truly personal. I'm concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing numbers who seem to be detransitioning, returning to their original sex, because they regret taking the steps they have, in some cases altering their bodies irrevocably and taking away their fertility. Some say they decided to transition after realizing they were same-sex attracted, and that transitioning was partly driven by homophobia, either in society or in their families. Well, let's talk about this a second. Detransitioning is not what she's saying it is in this usage. She's talking about early detransition or desisting. This can go anywhere from just stopping changing masculine clothes. She's talking about girls, obviously, or stopping hormones very, very early on because of having the same dysphoria as someone who is trans will have. It's not homophobia. If they have homophobia in their families, I'm not even going to go this far. Parents are going to be less likely to be open to having a trans kid than they are to having a gay kid. Trust me on this one. Because if she can use anecdote, I'm an anecdote, and here I am. Most people aren't aware, and I certainly wasn't until I started researching the issue properly. I don't know when she started researching the issue properly. I wish she would have written about that, though. That 10 years ago, the majority of people wanting to transition to the opposite sex were male. That ratio is now reversed. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred to for transition treatment. I'm leaving the next line for a second. I had to really go and dig this one up. I did find a Times of London article, and Justin found an article from the Telegraph, also in Britain, because these are British sources, because obviously. This is glorious in its awfulness. I just have to read you the little bit here at the beginning. Penny Mordaunt, the Minister for Women and Equalities, wants to understand the reasons behind a 4,400% increase in girls being referred for transitioning in the past decade. Officials will look into the role of social media and the teaching of transgender issues in schools as part of their inquiries. Because of course they will, because of course people are being forced to be trans, because we have an agenda. There are concerns among some MPs that drug treatment is being offered too readily to children, some of them as young as 10, without fully understanding what lies behind their desire to change sex. Now, here is where we get the 4,400% number, and 1,700% for boys. I don't know why she didn't put that. In 2009-2010, a total of 10 girls were referred by doctors for gender treatment. By 2017-2018, that number had soared to 1,806. Referrals for boys have risen from 57 to 713 in the same period. Now, there's a few ways we can read that, but first of all, we have to address the elephant in a particularly ugly room. This is dishonest to the max. 4,400% increase over the 10 years in which being transgender is less of a social stigma. It's more easily available to get treatment for it. So we can assume that let's assume at least all of them were trying to come out. They were sitting in the closet somewhere. They were not having words for it. I had that when I was young. I didn't have words for it. And we can also assume that some of the quote unquote getting treatment, which is a lot more than 10, were passed through the system and then either transitioned or didn't, because there were more of them to begin with. So getting them to be roughly even is going to be that, but it's going to be an overlap. It's going to be kind of like that. There in the US, where we have terrible numbers, between the years of 2013 and 2018, there was a huge increase in people transitioning or being referred for transition. There were social reasons why that was believed to be a safe thing to do at the time. Yeah, that's just terrible. And autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers. Now, this one I had to find, or I didn't have to find it, Justin did. The closest thing that was found, and good on him for digging this one up, contrasts with referrals to Tavistock and Portman Gender Identity Disorder Service, in which it is mentioned, the links with the finding, there seems to be a higher prevalence of autism spectrum conditions. Now, there is a comorbidity between about 10% or so of trans people. Again, this is in the US and our numbers are terrible, so we don't really know, are in that range, including myself. One of the things this is telling us is that we don't know who we are. We don't have the mental capacity to know who we are, and we're just being led around. And I resent that one line more than I resent everything else in this entire paper. And there are a lot of things to resent in here. You're not protecting autistic girls, even if you consider us girls, and I automatically switched in my head. The same phenomenon has been seen in the US. In 2018, American physician and researcher Lisa Littman set out to explore it. The intrepid explorer. We're going to have some fun with Lisa Littman. If you look, there is an entire video that Justin has that is on Lisa Littman. I'm going to be cribbing heavily from that. And I'm going to be cribbing a bit from Zinnia Jones, just so it's too much of a good thing. In an interview, she said, parents online were describing a very unusual pattern of transgender identification where multiple friends and even entire friend groups became transgender identified at the same time. I would have been remiss had I not considered social contagion and peer influences as potential factors, and sugary cereals and Saturday morning cartoons as well. Do not forget the sugary cereals and Saturday morning cartoons, because what kind of researcher are you? Littman mentioned Tumblr, Reddit, Instagram, and YouTube as contributing factors to rapid onset gender dysphoria, where she believes that in the realm of transgender identification, youth have created particularly insular echo chambers. Well, this is a funny thing to come out of an echo chamber, because that's a talking point that comes out of an echo chamber of gender critical thought, and I'm just going to call them gender critical because I don't really feel like fighting that particular fight. Now, to read from Zinnia Jones here, concept of rapid onset gender dysphoria was proposed in July of 2016 by a trio of blogs with a history of overtly transphobic perspectives that are at odds with the current evidence on transness. Fourth Wave Now, TransGenderTrend.com, and YouthTransCriticalProfessionals.org. Now, the problem is that the sites that she took from and the stories that she took from them and the people that she took these stories from are all parents with some problem about transgender being in our midst. Because we come out of pods, we don't come out of Tumblr. Doesn't anybody know anything? Now, if you're going to talk to parents who are already thinking that trans is a trend, then you're going to get data that indicates that being trans is a trend, because that's the only place you're looking. Now, for most of us who were looking for a place to belong, who are already trans and just never thought that that was okay to be, yes, the internet is wonderful. It's also quite terrible in places, but I found a community that were like me. And to say that that is causing my transition instead of helping to alleviate my pain is dishonest, it is cruel, it is horrible. But let's go to the last paragraph here. Her paper caused a furor. Not touching that. She was accused of bias and spreading misinformation about transgender people, subjected to a tsunami of abuse, and a concerted campaign to discredit both her and her work. Her work is not to be credited, and a lot of the spreading misinformation that she was accused of was from other people in the psychology field. The journal took the paper offline and re-reviewed it before republishing it. However, her career took a similar hit to that suffered by Maya Forrester. Someone else took care of that, so I don't have to, because that's where I'd start screaming and cursing. Lisa Littman had dared challenge one of the central tenets of trans activism, which is, actually look at the data, check out science, see what it has to say, that kind of thing. Silly me. Which is that a person's gender identity is innate like sexual orientation. I can't speak to anyone's experience. Nobody, the activist insisted, could ever be persuaded into being trans. True. Some people can probably be persuaded into thinking they're trans, but that plays out pretty quickly. There is a fair amount of data on this. Please go look at it. It's not hard to find. The thing that bothers me about this dishonesty, and I'm gonna just talk as me here for a second. I have been talking as me, but I've been talking as me and Justin, really. The thing that bothers me personally is all of this is telling me that were I a young trans person, exactly what I was told when I was a young trans person. Because I came out back in high school, way long ago, is that I'm a confused gay person, or that's not a thing that's possible to be, or, oh, you'll get over it. And as someone now much older than in high school, I'm still being told that. And if it's been all this time and I haven't, then what does that say about whether it's real to me? Thank you.
Ugh, bad research is a major problem, and I've noticed that transmedicalists and TERFs really like Littman. Thank you so much for such a thorough debunk of these claims. Up next in the train wreck, Rowling goes after trans men. Oh, you thought she was only concerned with people born XY coming into women's spaces? Oh, how limited in your thinking. Her hate includes all of us. Who better to debunk this BS than a non-binary masculine activist from our own community? Raziel from Creepy Eevees, I yield the floor.
Let's do this.
The writings of young trans men reveal a group of notably sensitive and clever people. The more of their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with their insightful descriptions of anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, self-harm, and self-hatred, the more I've wondered whether, if I'd been born 30 years later, I too might have tried to transition. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been huge. I struggled with severe OCD as a teenager. If I'd found community and sympathy online that I couldn't find in my immediate environment, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son my father had openly said he'd have preferred.
So to get this straight, you could have been persuaded to transition because of the allure of community and acceptance?
When I read about the theory of gender identity, I remembered how mentally sexless I felt in youth. I remember Colette's description of herself as a mental hermaphrodite, and Simone de Beauvoir's words, "It is perfectly natural for the future woman to feel indignant at the limitations posed upon her by her sex. The real question is not why she should reject them. The problem is rather to understand why she accepts them."
Wait. First off, where did you read about this theory of gender identity? Do you have a source you can cite? Second, this is just postulating, well, what if you are not wanting to be girl? You should accept being girl. Which I'm sure many people with dysphoria tried to accept their gender that they were assigned at birth, however, that's not how that works. Most people with gender dysphoria tried being the gender they were assigned at birth and found that it felt wrong or they felt out of place.
As I didn't have the realistic possibility of becoming a man back in the 1980s, it had to be books and music that got me through both my mental health issues and the sexualized scrutiny and judgment that set so many girls to war against their bodies in their teens. Fortunately for me, I found my own sense of otherness, and my ambivalence about being a woman, reflected in the work of female writers and musicians who reassured me that, in spite of everything a sexist world tries to throw at the female-bodied, it's fine not to feel pink, frilly, and compliant inside your own head. It's okay to feel confused, dark, both sexual and non-sexual, unsure of what or who you are.
So I can at least understand part of this. Books and music were also an escape for me to hide away from my mental issues. However, that isn't the full case for people with dysphoria. They can't just hide behind books and wishful thinking because their problems are with being in the wrong body, not just, ew, my ass is too big, or I'm so fat. While yes, people with dysphoria and most modern women have an issue with body dysmorphia, which is the feeling of not feeling like you're in the correct body or you're disgusted at the way that your body looks. These are still issues with most women today, both trans and non, and by no measure affect whether or not they want to transition or to those that feel dysphoric.
I want to be very clear here. I know transition will be a solution for some gender dysphoric people, although I'm also aware through extensive research that studies have consistently shown that between 60 to 90% of gender dysphoric teens will grow out of their dysphoria. Again and again, I've been told to just meet some trans people. I have. In addition to a few younger people who are all adorable, I happen to know a self-described transsexual woman who's older than I am and wonderful. Although she's open about her past as a gay man, I've always found it hard to think of her as anything other than a woman, and I believe, and certainly hope, she's completely happy to have transitioned. Being older, though, she went through a long and rigorous process of evaluation, psychotherapy, and staged transformation. The current explosion of trans activism is urging a removal of almost all the robust systems through which the candidates for sex reassignment are once required to pass. A man who intends to have no surgery and take no hormones may now secure himself a gender recognition certificate and be a woman in the sight of the law. Many people aren't aware of this.
What the fuck? Rowling, what the actual fuck? Where did you pull this fucking statistic from? 60 to 90% of all teens grow out of their gender dysphoria. There's a science behind children growing out of dysphoria. We're talking under 13, but teens? Please fucking give me whatever you're referencing. I'm also just gonna skip over the rest of this paragraph here because it's familiar, a la I'm not racist, I have a black friend type of deal.
We're living through the most misogynistic period I've experienced. Back in the 80s, I imagined that my future daughters, should I have any, would have it far better than I ever did, but between the backlash against feminism and a porn-saturated online culture, I believe things have got significantly worse for girls. Never have I seen women denigrated and dehumanized to the extent that they are now. From the leader of the free world's long history of sexual assault accusations, and his proud boast of grabbing them by the pussy, to the incel, involuntarily celibate, movement that rages against women who won't give them sex, to the trans activists who declare that TERFs need punching and re-educating, men across the political spectrum seem to agree. Women are asking for trouble. Everywhere, women are being told to shut up and sit down. Or else.
So I will again agree partially here. Misogyny is still fucking rampant thing in today's society and it's horrible, but looking at the supposed backlash against feminism is a gross misrepresentation of what is actually occurring. In today's society, we're looking for everyone to be equal, which was the original intention of feminism, but the new generation of feminists are taking it to an extreme with the phrase "eat all men" and the like. Most, quote, true feminists have taken to showing that they care via websites and help centers. Even in today's society, feminism is split into two groups. You have radical feminists, or radfems, and feminists. Radfems are the extremist, or again radical feminists that I was mentioning earlier with the eat all men comments. To address the porn-saturated online culture where females are concerned, what exactly do you believe is wrong with it? Women of all cultures and sizes are drawing porn, are in porn, make the most money in porn. Women in porn have chosen to be there, chosen and enjoy what they do. So what's wrong with women loving themselves enough to be comfortable doing what they're doing? Moving straight on past that, I will agree that Trump is an absolute garbage human and deserves to be locked away for life for what he did to those girls, but Trump is not the standard man. Hashtag not all men. Not all men are like him. Not all men do horrible things to women. A Kaiser Family Foundation poll done by the Washington Post in 2016 showed that 43% of men identified with being a feminist. So I have no clue where you're hearing that women need to sit down, shut up, or else. There's absolutely hardly anyone saying that. I'll skip over most of this next paragraph talking bullshit about how femaleness not residing in sex body is misogynistic and regressive. There's just one line that I like though, that there isn't a difference between a trans woman and a woman. They're both women.
But, as many women have said before me, woman is not a costume. Woman is not an idea in a man's head. Woman is not a pink brain, a liking for Jimmy Choo's, or any of the other sexist ideas now somehow touted as progressive. Moreover, the inclusive language that calls female people menstruators and people with vulvas strikes many women as dehumanizing and demeaning. I understand why trans activists consider this language to be appropriate and kind, but for those of us who've had degrading slurs spat at us by violent men, it's not neutral. It's hostile and alienating.
Being a woman is not a costume, you're right, but trans women dressing like the women they are is not a costume. Also, the language that is hostile and alienating? It's not hostile, it's physically accurate. However, if you're a trans woman that hasn't transitioned yet, you're still a woman regardless of if you have these descriptors or not. My final thoughts. Rowling, you're a disappointment. Not just to me or my friends here, you're a disappointment to the LGBTQ+ community as a whole. You've belittled trans men, trans women, and most women as you assume to speak for all of them. All in all, -10 out of 10, Rowling. -10 out of 10.
Thanks, Raz. By the way, go check out Raz's channel. It's freaking awesome. The content there primarily focuses on SCPs and awesome game lore, and you guys would have a lot of fun if you check it out. Up next, we have my very own co-host from Xenia Bridge, Jen Aldrich of the Atheist Winedown. For some reason, Rowling decided to use sexual trauma as an excuse to be a TERF, which I'm very sorry that she faced, by the way. And I figured that Jen would be the perfect person to tear apart why that is absolutely ridiculous. Jen, you got this.
Which brings me to the fifth reason I'm deeply concerned about the consequences of the current trans activism.
So, like the other 4 heavily laden bigotry pieces of shit weren't enough.
I've been in the public eye now for over 20 years and have never talked publicly about being a domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor. This isn't because I'm ashamed those things happened to me, but because they're traumatic to revisit and remember. I also feel protective of my daughter from my first marriage. I didn't want to claim sole ownership of a story that belongs to her, too. However, a short while ago, I asked her how she'd feel if I were publicly honest about that part of my life, and she encouraged me to go ahead.
Yeah, you've been in the public eye for over 20 years. And now, when it's convenient for you to turn around and say, but hey, I've been a victim too, is when you want to come out with your story. Now, I'm not going to sit here and discredit and say that what Rowling didn't go through wasn't fucked up. It was. And nobody should ever be the victim of domestic violence. However, I don't appreciate, as a victim of abuse from a partner, I never, ever will sit here and say, well, you know, I'm a victim too. And then to have the nerve to bring her daughter into this as if this is going to earn her some credit points from being empathetic to asking her daughter about it. Your daughter has nothing to do with what the fuck you're saying and the TERF ass shit that you've put yourself into. So please, let's leave innocence out of it. All right? Cool.
I'm mentioning these things now, not in an attempt to garner sympathy, but out of solidarity with the huge numbers of women who have histories like mine, who have been slurred as bigots for having concerns around single-sex spaces.
So now you want solidarity with women. You are asking for solidarity with women when leaving women out. Like, this is the fucking densest motherfucking point that I can sit here and be like, so you want solidarity, but you want to exclude actual women from that fucking solidarity and think it's going to garner you sympathy and empathy, even though you say that's not what I'm going for. Bullshit. Come on. Like, really.
I managed to escape my first violent marriage with some difficulty, but I'm now married to a truly good and principled man, safe and secure in ways I never in a million years expected to be. However, the scars left by violence and sexual assault don't disappear, no matter how loved you are, and no matter how much money you've made. My perennial jumpiness is a family joke, and even I know it's funny, but I pray my daughters never have the same reasons I do for hating sudden loud noises, or finding people behind me when I haven't heard them approaching. If you could come inside my head and understand what I feel when I read about a trans woman dying at the hands of a violent man, you'd find solidarity and kinship. I have a visceral sense of the terror in which those trans women have realized that the only thing keeping me alive was the shaky self-restraint of my attacker. I'm really glad that she was able to escape a violent person and a violent partner and somebody that was supposed to love her and her children. I'm gonna give her that. However, you sat here and said very hurtful, disgusting, exclusionary things about trans women, and now you want to sit here and act as if you identify as them, when meanwhile you turned around and said that they can't identify as women because they're not women. So which the fuck is it? Do you identify with these women as women, or are they not women enough for you to identify with them? Which fucking point are we making here? You can't ride the line on fucking both and expect a fucking community that you sat here and said wasn't good enough for the same fucking rights you deserve. Now you want sympathy from them. Bitch, please. I believe the majority of trans-identified people not only pose zero threat to others, but are vulnerable for all the reasons I've outlined. Trans people need and deserve protection. Like women, they're most likely to be killed by sexual partners. Trans women who work in the sex industry, particularly trans women of color, are at particular risk. Like every other domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor I know, I feel nothing but empathy and solidarity with trans women who've been abused by men. So trans people deserve protection, but they're on separate protections? Why can't they be protected the same as you are? What is the sudden privilege and what is the sudden right that you have because you identify with the genitals that you were born with that puts you above what protections they need? I don't understand that.
they're most likely to be killed by sexual partners like women. So you're sitting here noting all these points on how they are women, how they go through the same things that women go through, yet you can't seem to identify them as women. This is where the disconnect is. This is a lot of really cute fucking lip service about how empathetic you are. And oh my God, I identify with them and we all go through the same fucking thing. However, you're not the same as me. Bitch, fuck you.
So I want trans women to be safe. At the same time, I do not want to make natal girls and women less safe. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, and as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. That is the simple truth.
So you're saying you want women to be safe, but not with other women. And I'm not going to sit here and justify her separation of trans women and sexed women and women who identify with the genitals that they were born with, because there is no fucking distinction. It's not throwing bathroom doors and changing room doors to any man who feels that they're a woman. How fucking fucked up and degrading are you, you fucking prissy ivory tower cunt? I mean, like, I can picture her wearing the fucking pussy hat as she's fucking saying this shit. I, as a victim of partner violence, has never once felt uncomfortable, unsafe, or out of place or threatened by another woman in a changing room with me or another woman in a bathroom with me. And this is what the fuck it is. It's women in bathrooms. It's women in fucking changing rooms. And no amount of stepping over yourself with your TERF ass bullshit is gonna fucking change that. We don't feel threatened by women. We don't feel threatened by other women. However, you want these women to walk into bathrooms and changing rooms with men who may not understand or want to understand, like Rowling, of what they're going through. And you think that's not going to make them victims of violence? You think that's not going to make them feel unsafe and that's not going to make them feel like they're going to be victimized? I don't understand. Fuck you. How dare you turn around and say, I'm for trans women and I'm for their rights, but I want them to use a bathroom and be in an intimate space that they feel threatened in, and they feel all eyes are on them, and they feel that they may be attacked or accosted or harassed. Why is it that you get the right to fucking pee peacefully, but they don't? How dare you? How dare you fucking sit here and cling to your fucking vagina that you feel comfortable in when there is a woman out there who doesn't? And you have the gall and the fucking right, think you have the right to say my comfortability trumps your possible victimization. You are not the victim here, Rowling. I understand, yes, you are a victim of domestic violence, but no amount of signaling, because that's exactly what you're doing. No amount of signaling another group is going to save you from the shit you've said and the lies that you've spread and the division that you have caused. We don't feel threatened by women. We feel threatened by you. That you would put another woman in a space to be victimized, in a space to feel uncomfortable, in a space to feel that they don't belong for your comfortability. Because you can't grasp your head around a fucking subject that if you Googled for 2.5 fucking minutes would sit here and tell you it is not as black and white as you think it is, and you say it is. It is not as cut and dry as men feeling as they are women. It's not a man feeling that they are a woman. This is a woman. This is a woman that in one sentence you're advocating for rights and how they're victimized and how they're killed by their partners, but yet want to subject them to being harassed and assaulted in bathrooms and changing rooms.
Thanks, Jen. I completely agree that Rowling is just trying to get brownie points without actually doing the work to be an ally. Like, thank you again for calling her out on the BS. Next up, we have Aerin from Aerin's Chair, a disability activist on YouTube who really wanted to get into the claims about PTSD and also dig into this law a little bit that Rowling has such an issue with. Aerin, you got this.
Let's do this. On Saturday morning, I read that the Scottish government is proceeding with its controversial gender recognition plans, which will, in effect, mean that all a man needs to become a woman is to say he is one. To use a very contemporary word, I was triggered. Ground down by the relentless attacks on trans activists on social media, when I was only there to give children feedback about pictures they'd drawn for my book under lockdown, I spent much of Saturday in a very dark place inside my head, as memories of a serious sexual assault I suffered in my 20s recurred on a loop. That assault happened at a time and in a space where I was vulnerable, and a man capitalized on an opportunity. I couldn't shut out those memories, and I was finding it hard to contain my anger and disappointment about the way I believe my government is playing fast and loose with women and girls' safety.
The issue shouldn't be controversial. People are recognizing a person based on the way a person identifies and giving them the same respect and rights you have, such as using the bathroom that makes them feel safe, or is that a thing that only belongs to cis people? Does it also only belong to cis people that should be addressed in a way that makes them feel comfortable or respects how they identify? Gender recognition means people are getting the same human decency that you're receiving, and I'm having a hard time seeing that as a bad thing. I recognize that you have sexual assault trauma from when you were in your 20s, and it may have caused PTSD. There are going to be bad people that capitalize on those fears, and they are in the vast minority. I can empathize with the pain of a flashback for something like this. However, this is not playing fast and loose, as you put it, with safety. In fact, according to the bill that is being proposed, the person living as a different gender has to get a certificate proving that they are the gender they say they are. This is so they can change things on their passport and ID cards. They are amending a very rigorous process to make it easier for people to get their certificate and make it less lengthy, stressful, and less expensive. It also adds non-binary people.
Late on Saturday evening, scrolling through children's pictures before I went to bed, I forgot the first rule of Twitter. Never, ever expect a nuanced conversation, and reacted to what I felt was degrading language about women. I spoke up about the importance of sex and have been paying the price ever since. I was transphobic, I was a cunt, a bitch, a TERF, I deserved canceling, punching, and death. "You are Voldemort," said one person, clearly feeling this was the only language I'd understand.
So I've actually had loads of nuanced conversations on Twitter. It is possible, but the way I do so is asking clarifying questions and taking off the glasses of my own biases. I ask what somebody means so I can steel man and no longer straw man. You are not worthy of death because I don't think anyone really is personally, but what you are saying is transphobic language. That doesn't necessarily make you transphobic, but it means you have a lot to learn about what it is to be trans and the struggle that being trans is.
It would be so much easier to tweet the approved hashtags, because of course trans rights are human rights, and of course trans lives matter. Scoop up the woke cookies and bask in a virtue signaling afterglow. As Simone de Beauvoir also wrote, "Without a doubt, it is more comfortable to endure blind bondage than to work for one's liberation. The dead, too, are better suited to the earth than the living."
The quote that you are using is from the book Second Sex, in which Simone also states that one is not born but becomes a woman. This statement is found in the introduction on page 14 and has been disputed by some feminist scholars because it doesn't focus on biological differences, but rather is viewing it as an innate person and a source of self-knowledge or identification and expression.
Huge numbers of women are justifiably terrified by the trans activists. I know this because so many have got in touch with me to tell their stories. They're afraid of doxing, of losing their jobs or their livelihoods, and of violence.
I will be the first to say that they're extremists in any group and that can be dangerous. However, what we have with trans activists today is a group of people that want to be seen as and the same as or equal to cis people. This is the same as women in the past or any group that has been marginalized in the past and wants to be same as the group that is not. And trans men, women, and non-binary people want the same human decency and respect that you yourself receive.
But endlessly unpleasant as its constant targeting of me has been, I refuse to bow down to a movement that I believe is doing demonstrable harm in seeking to erode women as a political and biological class and offering cover to predators like few before it. I stand alongside the brave women and men, gay, straight, and trans, who are standing up for the freedom of speech and thought, and for the rights and safety of some of the most vulnerable in our society. Young gay kids, fragile teenagers, and women who are reliant on and wish to retain their single-sex spaces. Polls show those women are in the vast majority, and exclude only those privileged or lucky enough never to have come up against male violence or sexual assault, and who've never troubled to educate themselves on how prevalent it is.
If a person wants a single-sex space, that is fine. In their own home, where they are not forcing to or causing harm to others. That is my biggest deal. If you are not causing harm to others by your beliefs, that is a good thing. However, let me also point something out. I have used the bathroom with trans people, so have you. Did you know? Did I? No. And how could we unless we violate their privacy to find out? Policing who can use the restroom does just that. It violates someone else's privacy. Trans people are also human, deserve the same respect, use a ruddy toilet. The same as the next person, they deserve the same safety and freedom that you yourself enjoy. I am not going to deny that cis women are the vast majority of sexual assault victims. However, trans people are also victims of sexual assault to a very high degree, as well as regular assault and hate crimes. I'm going to link these sources. I'm not going to go into it, but this is not a black and white issue, and you seem to think it is. I am basing the seem to think based on your current tweets and what you have stated in this article itself.
The one thing that gives me hope is that the women who can protest and organize are doing so, and they have some truly decent men and trans people alongside them. Political parties seeking to appease the loudest voices in this debate are ignoring women's concerns at their peril. In the UK, women are reaching out to each other across party lines, concerned about the erosion of their hard-won rights and widespread intimidation. None of the gender-critical women I've talked to hates trans people. On the contrary, many of them became interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for trans youth, and they're hugely sympathetic towards trans adults who simply want to live their lives, but who are facing a backlash for a brand of activism they don't endorse. The supreme irony is that the attempt to silence women with the word TERF may have pushed more young women towards radical feminism than the movement's seen in decades.
This one giant paragraph I'm responding to as one big thing, mainly because by this point I've also edited and corrected your entire essay, and it would have received an F in any literature class that I have attended. However, being gender critical is a form of hate to trans people, and it's the same thing whether or not you realize this. There are trans people, men and women, that are out in the day-to-day public life. They need to use the restroom. It happens. Would you have them use the one assigned to their sex? If so, that can cause depression, dysphoria, other mental strain, sexual assault, and can lead to higher suicide rates. Would you have them hold it until they got home? Infection, urinary tract infections, depression, dysphoria. That's not fair. Only letting passing ones use gender-affirming places? That can lead to more dysphoria, depression, higher suicide rates. Or separate bathrooms and promote separate but equal. People tried that. It became Jim Crow laws and was not at all equal. All I am saying is let people that are not harming others just live their lives and read the bill before you write alarmist articles like this. Because this whole article is an alarmist piece and it's not fair to other people.
Thanks, Aerin, and to all of you. Seriously, I could not have done this by myself. The next couple of paragraphs are basically more virtue signaling by Rowling and excuses with transphobic language layered in. I hope that you guys have seen from everything that we've showed here that she's just trying to subvert the conversation and completely disown any responsibility for the crappy claims that she keeps making. It's obvious that she wants to take credit for being an ally in much the same way that she wanted to take credit for having queer representation with Dumbledore when there's absolutely no hints whatsoever within the storyline that this was the case. And she has a long history of queerbaiting and being that sort of pseudo-ally, but there's a much more important reason why we needed to make this video. In the same way that Donald Trump has brought all of the racists out of the woodwork and into the streets, JK Rowling has done much the same with TERFs, and in an era where the administration just tried to strip very important medical rights from the LGBT community, particularly from trans people, issues like this matter, and people with big platforms like this using them in order to spread hateful rhetoric also matters. Just because on Monday the Supreme Court made a ruling that the capitalist class can exploit us all equally doesn't necessarily mean that that ruling extends to medical rights, and each one of these rights is specific and independent from one another as far as the way that the court's ruling on it. So chances are a trans friend who gets COVID or is trying to get their hormones and goes into a bigoted doctor's office, because of the rollback of these protections, they might not be able to get help, and you should care about that. Everybody should care about that. So I want to go back and thank everybody that helped me out on this video. Raziel from Creepy Eevees, Aerin from Erin's Chair, Jen Aldritz from the Atheist Winedown, Christy Abbey from The Fluid Voice, and Justin from SJW Debates, Callan and Shay from Transgardr, All of you were so important in getting this video together. Thank you guys so much. This was such a long article, and honestly, your support helped me feel validated in wanting to do this debunk. So thank you again, all of you, for doing this. And thank you to the viewer for sticking through it. Special thanks also to Gaelic Knox for their amazing artwork. My avatar and Callan's were both done by Gaelic Knox. Link in the description to Gaelic Knox's website. And remember, we're stronger together.